There's a recording of today's event. Right, I think I'm going to kick off. Right, okay. Welcome everyone to this morning's webinar on how to build a collaborative and inclusive flexible working culture. I'm your host, for those of you who don't know me. My name is Juliet Turnbull. I'm the founder of 2 to 3 Days, whose mission it is to advance women's equality in the workplace through the power of flexible working. Today, 2 to 3 Days is growing and nurturing the UK's largest online community of highly capable women who want to pursue their careers by working flexibly for progressive companies who put diversity and inclusion at the heart of their recruitment strategies. Today, our guest is Ursula Tavender, who is the founder of Taking Care of Business and Mumbelievable, who is on a mission through to her own personal circumstances to change the way of working for everyone, by helping companies become more flexible and inclusive, by thinking and acting differently and take bold decisions that drive impactful change. So welcome, Ursula.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You and I are both cut from the same cloth when it comes to valuing the importance of work-life integration. And thanks to COVID-19, the argument for companies not fully embracing flexible working has well and truly got thrown out of the window, or that's what we all hope. But whilst the economic and societal argument is very much in evidence, like so many things in life, unlocking the value lies in the hard work of actually executing it. And this is the hard bit. But whilst it is raining outside, oops, I'm just going to let a couple more people in. So whilst it's raining outside, I know I speak on behalf of all our guests this morning when I say that we're all very much looking forward to you bringing a bit of sunshine into our lives and sharing with us your transformational framework that will embed flexibility at a cultural and behavioural level.
Thank you. That's my hope, is that I can be the sunshine this morning.
You are the sunshine amongst the rain. So everybody, we'll keep you on mute, and Ursula and I are going to have a very relaxed conversation this morning, which will navigate us through her amazing framework. Please, 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 if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box and I will scoop them up at the end of our conversation. So, without further ado, Ursula, let's kick off with a good old meaty question.
Yeah.
There's a great deal of traction in the world of flexible working at the moment. Can you give us a quick summary of the last few months and the impact that COVID-19 has had on amplifying the conversation around flexibility at work?
Of course. So I think what's happened in the last few months is that people feel more able to bring their whole selves to work, and we've inevitably seen that because we're in each other's homes. That, you know, it's really humanized the way that we interact with each other, and I think, you know, that's an extraordinarily positive thing to come from a really, really tragic and difficult time. I think that there's an increased focus on well-being being placed as a strategic priority for businesses too, and that because flexibility is so intrinsically tied to people's well-being and their ability to manage their energy, manage their time, work when it suits them, where it's possible to marry that with the demands of their job. That's meant that, you know, people are having more conversations about these matters, and that in turn has lent to people feeling more empowered to talk about flexibility and feel like it's okay to talk about it, perhaps in organizations where culturally it wasn't the norm to talk about it, particularly if you don't happen to be in a group that is seen to be working flexibly as a you know, that being commonplace. So it's been really interesting.
Okay, and what would be the top 3 lessons from you speaking to your clients that companies are beginning to take home from this time, this crazy time?
I think first of all that it's possible to embrace change at a far greater pace than they'd imagined before. So many business leaders that I've been speaking to are like, we had no idea that our workforce was so resilient and so capable of managing that magnitude and the pace of change. I think also that the second thing I think would be that it's possible for more jobs to be done flexibly than was originally have envisaged before. So I've always said that, you know, I believe every single job can be done flexibly in some way, but that every option for flexible working won't be available for every job. So it's not possible for site-based roles to be done flexibly, as in remotely, but it's possible for them to flex their hours, or it's possible for them to take breaks at different times, that kind of thing. So I think it's opened up people's minds to what's possible, and thirdly, it's really changed the minds of deep skeptics who thought that it just wouldn't work and people wouldn't be productive, they wouldn't be able to be trusted, and that's been flipped on its head.
Okay, and whilst the pandemic has been a catalyst to open up the new world of work for everyone,
yeah,
everything in the newspaper, there was an article again this morning in the Times about remote working and everybody working from home. What next? I think this is what everybody, you know, everybody is on the edge of their seat, sort of knowing that we've got this sort of new norm. We don't quite know how this is all going to manifest itself, especially after the summer holidays when the kids go back to school. And we've got the furloughing coming up in August. What next? What are companies trying to embrace so that we can move forward, not backwards?
So for me, what I'm seeing overwhelmingly is that involves a blend. So there's a study that's been released this week by the Adecco Group, which I can share the link to if that's helpful. And it's found that 77% of people want the option to work remotely, and that 79% of people want the option to have a blended approach to the way they work. So they want to have more options about the way they manage their time in a blended way. So they want some office-based time and they want some remote time within their week. And I think that demonstrates for me the you know, the data behind the conversations, that anecdotal conversations that I've been having with businesses, where, you know, they've done their own internal surveys and they are finding that there's a pocket of people who would prefer to work remotely all the time. That's quite a small group of people generally, and then there's a small group of people who want to go back to the office when that's possible. They want to go back to their place of work full time. But overwhelmingly, the biggest demand from employees, and what I think is next, is the development of that blended approach to working, so that we're able to better manage our real estate as businesses. We're better able to manage safety, I suppose, in the immediate future in terms of managing that space, but also support people's well-being as they move through the stages of the various stages of the emotional impact of the pandemic, which, you know, it's had a really profound impact on everybody, hasn't it?
Okay, and how are companies responding to that changing demand? So so you're saying that 79% want to blend. How are companies responding to this demand?
So I think the greatest thing that I'm seeing is more engagement in terms of asking people what they want. So for me, that's always been something that I would recommend from the outset. If you are looking at embracing a flexible working culture before the pandemic, in a world that none of us can remember anymore, you know, ask your people what they want, and they will tell you. So I think I'm definitely seeing a more open-minded approach to having that two-way dialogue with a workforce about what they really want moving forward.
Okay, and what are the most common challenges you're seeing in organisations trying to make flexible working work?
Okay,
so it's all very good asking, and it's already good, but you've got to make it happen in reality. And you've got to have people doing stuff and getting stuff done within the core working hours, haven't you?
So the biggest problem I think I see with flexible working is inconsistency. So you'll have pockets of a business where it's done really, really well, and you might sit in a team where, you know, it's really welcomed that you work flexibly, and it's very, you know, there's a very open culture of working flexibly. And largely that's down to manager attitudes and leadership buy-in generally. But confidence in terms of how you adopt flexible working within a team. But I think there's that manager support piece is a real challenge as well. There's challenges with unconscious bias and assumptions and perceptions about who flexible working is for. There's problems with people overworking, particularly at the moment when everybody's working remotely. There's problems with guilt about being away from your desk. If you aren't visible to your team and your boss and your company, will people think that you're shirking from home, which is a term that I absolutely loathe. I think there's a problem with communication sometimes, so people aren't confident about how they communicate with teams that work in different ways, and you know, that buy-in as well at that really senior level to make flexible working part of the culture. What else? Guilt, overwork,
What?
resistance. Yeah,
So
they're the
these,
general
they're all the
challenges.
challenges. But then when a company's faced with all this a sort of smorgasbord of lack of visibility, confidence, managers' attitude, it's quite complex for companies, even if they're showing willing.
Yeah.
So what holds a company back from embracing change and not turning into just burying their head in the sand and hoping that this, I don't want to call it a problem, but this situation just sort of disappears? What stops companies from going, do you know what, we're going to embrace this?
I think it's a risk, isn't it? There's a fear of change, and I think overwhelmingly we've proved in the pandemic that we can all deal with immense amounts of change. That's kind of blown that one out of the water. And it's difficult to answer that question in the context of now, because flexible working has suddenly become, rather than the thing that people, some people were shying away from and perhaps resisting, it's been the very thing that's enabled us to keep business going. So all of a sudden it's front and centre, and it's quite ironic, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that resistance and that risk taking has been blown out the water temporarily. For now anyway. I think that kind of the trust element is a really big preventative factor. So if somebody feels that their teams will abuse trust and won't get the job done, that can really hold organisations back. It is another risk, isn't it, of abuse of trust. I think fundamentally it all comes down to fear about how to manage it, fear about people not doing the right thing, fear of not delivering, fear of not being able to build those relationships effectively, and they're the main things I think that hold companies back.
I think, thank you. You very, very succinctly have sort of presented the situation that we as a country, as a world, we're dealing with, as an economy in the UK, but as individual business owners, which we've got so many on with today. And the reason why people have given up their hour of their valuable time to listen to you is they want to know a bit about the how. You dealt with the why and the what. So now over to how. Can you start to share with us some of your effective strategies for helping to overcome these challenges?
Of course. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, actually. So I feel like there's a lot more we could say about all of that stuff, but in the interest of keeping that all brief, I think
we can come back to that if we start to see that everybody knows the why, but we've got to find a solution. So what's in the Ursula's solution to implementing and embedding a wonderful culture of flexible working?
So the thing that I use, that I found most useful to work through with companies when I start to work with them, is to go through a model that I've developed. And at this point, I'll share my screen to share that model with you, because it's useful to have that visual. And I will, let's do that now. So you should be able to see something called the flexible model. And conveniently, I've managed to shoehorn the 8 cultural elements to be there for a flexible working culture to work into the word flexible, which I'm quite proud of. I was quite pleased with my ability to do that. So these are this acronym Flexible is the model that I use, and it is 8 elements within a culture that need to be there for flexible working to stick. And the first of those is, as we've talked about already, foundations built on trust. And without trust, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, that flexible working just doesn't work. So I think when organisations can place a really proactive focus on developing a trust culture, that is something that really makes flexible working take off. And there are 2 things that I'd like to share at this point. So one is the work of a neuroscientist called Paul Zak. He commissioned a study. He set up the Center for Neuroeconomics in the US and worked with a university research team to conduct a really fascinating study on the neurobiology of trust. And so what they found was that positive social interactions, what they were looking at was what specifically makes people trust other people. And if we can understand chemically what happens in our brains to instigate us, instigate trust, a trusting relationship, then you can do more of those things. So what they found was that when we have positive social interactions at work, be that something like you reward somebody, you recognize somebody, or you feel that you are given the autonomy to do your job in the way that you feel is best. What other examples could there be of positive social interactions? Just those praise moments, those kind of building meaningful relationships with your colleagues, those kinds of things. When those examples of positive social interactions happen, they stimulate the production of the hormone oxytocin, which is our feel-good hormone. And that reduces our fear of taking the risk to trust somebody. So that's chemically what happens in our brains. And so that's why when we have positive experiences with our colleagues, we begin to trust them.
Yeah.
And it might be seemingly unrelated. We might not be able to put our finger on why we actually trust somebody. And so that's why I think that study is really useful to understand chemically what happens. He's got a great TED talk. I can share the link to it, which talks through the study and the neuroscience of trust. So I'll share that. And the second thing, building on that, is the acronym BRAVING, which is a model that Dr. Brené Brown developed. She's a research professor at the University of Houston, and very, very famous TED talk and on the power of vulnerability. But also she's studied emotions like trust and courage, empathy and leadership for the last 20, 30 years. And she's come up with an acronym called BRAVING, which is all the elements that need to be present for trust to exist. And it's boundaries, responsibility, reliability, accountability, the vault, which is about confidentiality, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. And those things, if you take a look at the model and the acronym, that allows us to speak to specific behaviours and build on those behaviours in order to create trusting relationships with others. So I use those resources when I'm working with organisations to help them to build a great, strong culture of trust when it comes to flexible working. So the second element, and I can share all those resources. The second element is leadership buy-in, and without that strong commitment from the top, things really are an uphill battle. And I do a lot of work with HRDs to help them build the business case. People in the D&I space, help them build the business case and create that evidence to get that leadership buy-in, because I think that it goes back to the fear and resistant mindsets that we talked about and the reasons that hold people back. I think it's really useful if you are struggling with leadership commitment to think about who your audience is and what their areas of resistance are, and build the business case specifically tailored to them and to address those specific problems. The third element is everyone in this together, which is about making a team approach. So what I find is that in a lot of businesses that are struggling with inconsistency or any of the challenges that we've talked about already, they have a kind of company-wide approach to flexible working. And so they might have a policy or a guiding framework, and it's company-wide. But when you take a team approach and you allow teams to build their own microculture for flexible working, this is the transformative bit, and I'll move on to a tool that I have used time and time again with organisations, and I'll share that framework with you a bit later on. But that taking that team approach and enabling and empowering teams and equipping them with the tools to be able to build their own picture of what flexible working looks like for them overcomes that problem of, if you have a company-wide approach to flexible working, some teams will look at that and say, well, that won't work for us.
Yes, it's a one size fits all mentality, which doesn't work. And then you get the emotional disengagement, don't you?
Absolutely right. Yeah. So I'll come back to that because that's a real deal breaker. Yeah. Really, really transformative tool. X-ray vision through the business is about recognizing the importance of role modeling and visualization of what's possible. So when people see that somebody's working flexibly in whatever way, they then have it's like a psychological permission slip for them to ask for the same or do the same. So when you have a focus on creating internal champions and role models who can act as beacons for what's possible, that makes a massive difference. The next thing is about infrastructure. So you have to have, obviously, as we all know, we saw the blind panic of companies that were entirely desktop based being moved to laptops at the start of lockdown. When you have that infrastructure, that tech, that policy, that locations and workspaces that people can work flexibly within, when you have that infrastructure, things can really be set alight.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot more that I could say about all of these things, but I'm very happy to do that. If anybody wants to know more, let's arrange a call, and I can also share a PDF, as it says on the slide, about that.
Okay.
The next element, B, is about recruitment. So improving recruitment, and this is your bag, isn't it, Juliet? Looking at what we need to make sure that it's very clear throughout the entire recruitment process that it's possible for people to engage in a conversation about flexible working. Looking at unconscious bias in hiring managers, and making sure that the recruiters that you work with are open to having those discussions and promoting candidates that want flexibility. The next one is about that living and breathing a new way of work and making it part of the culture, which for me is about support for managers. That is the accelerator. So providing managers with toolkits, clinics, support events, coaching, making sure that they've got the tools that they need to really confidently and consistently manage a team working in different ways, will mean that everyone in the business can then live and breathe that new way of work. And then finally, we've touched on it already, that challenge of communication is kind of ever present, really. And I think that when you enable people to have better conversations and equip your people to have better conversations, they're able to communicate much more effectively, and then things are taken to the next level. And we can talk more about that in a moment when I share about the
Wow, that is amazing. I'm sure there's and thank you for agreeing that you're going to share your slides afterwards, because those questions have already come in. But that looks easy. If you go, right, I'll write down flexible and I'll start with F and I'll work my way through. We all know, again, that the devil is in the detail. The joy is in the little bits and pieces that happen. Where do our audience start with this? What are the
that's a great question.
It's so easy to feel so overwhelmed that you just and people's time are stretched and resource and yada yada yada. Where do you start on the flexible chart?
Okay,
so you go forwards, not backwards. And of course it's not going to happen overnight. It's progressive, it evolves. But where do you need to start so you don't go 2 steps forward and 3 steps back?
So what I find generally is that some of these are in a better place than others when I start working with businesses. So it's very rare. In fact, I don't think I've started working with an organisation where everything is at ground zero. So I think the first thing to do is to recognise where you are already, and to build on what's already happening in a really positive sense. So yes, I realise that it might look overwhelming, but I think that every single one of them is vital. It's based on years of my work and observations and kind of experiences working with different companies in different sectors of all sizes and types. But I think if I was to pinpoint 3 things, I would say trust is the number one. Help your people to understand what trust is and what they can do, everyone in an organisation, what everyone can do to build relationships based on trust and how they can rebuild trust when it's broken. I think if you have that kind of toolbox within you, you can overcome an immense amount of challenges. I think creating that support resource pack, toolbox, whatever that looks like for managers, to be able to make it work with their teams. So we can talk about more about that in a little while. But I think that's an absolute deal breaker. And as is the leadership and the role modelling piece. I think when people have that visibility and they have that focus on what's possible, they have that permission slip, and then they feel that they feel empowered to ask for flexible.
I would say it has to start from the top. You have to have that leadership buy-in. You have to have the CEO, the managing director saying publicly, to give permission, and then not only to give the permission, but then to be visibly seen to walk with the permission.
Yeah,
and to encourage other people to follow. Otherwise, it just becomes talk the talk. It's not walking it, is it?
Well, and it's that uphill battle that I was talking about as well. If you feel like it's not possible for senior leaders to work flexibly, then you don't have that. You have a block. So what you can often find is that it's really interesting. So with some organisations, you can't work flexibly until you get to a certain level, because then you can be trusted to do it. In others, you can only work flexibly until you get to a certain level, and then you get to the senior positions, you can't work flexibly anymore. So it's really interesting how that's evolved as a kind of it's a real dichotomy. But so I think when you have that role modelling and that leadership, that not only visible leadership commitment, but it's in the fabric of the way that you work, because that's what people do. And it's things like putting it in email signatures and talking about it in meetings, and creating that real leadership focus on flexibility as a mechanism for people to deliver their best work, I think.
And can we just talk a bit about trust, because how do you box and cox flexible working? Trust sits at the absolute core. I run my own team. We all work flexibly, and trust is just has to be an given as well as implied and acted upon. What would be your 3 takeaways or suggestions for our audience today to start to open up a culture of trust?
I think you have to be really intentional about it and explicit about it, and the companies that I've seen and worked with that have done this in the most effective ways actually have it as part of their leadership development and their onboarding as well. They've incorporated it into everything that they do, and it's something that they talk about regularly. It's something that's very much an organic, evolving part of their organisation, and it constantly needs work. So I think to create that intentional focus on trust, either through training or through awareness, just through facilitating conversations, would be a great place to start. There's also a brilliant program by Stephen Covey's son, Franklin Covey, and he wrote the book Speed of Trust, and then developed the program Leading at the Speed of Trust, which is extraordinary.
Okay. And you talked about helping people to understand that everybody has a collective responsibility. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? How do you get, and you've also talked earlier that whilst you can have it's no good anymore to have a one size fits all company policy, you have to break it down, which sort of also feeds into this bit about helping everybody understand that their bit. To me, flexibility is a two-way journey. It's not about the company just setting it out. Individuals have to come forward and know that there's some compromise, or there's a bit of give and take. Otherwise, all you're doing is swapping one rigid structure for what you perceive as a more modern day working structure, but actually becomes rigid again, and then that doesn't work either.
Completely agree. So
what would you,
the tool that I've developed to kind of, and I think it's a great time to sort of talk about that tool now. I've developed it to address that problem, because what I was seeing was that there was this company generalized approach to flexibility, and B, people were assuming that flexibility means that a business would be dictated to by what its employees want. And so I've always been very clear that flexibility isn't a free-for-all. About, as you rightly say, nail on the head, it's about a conversation about what's possible and a compromise. So there are always times when your work life will demand more of you than your personal life, and that's when there's projects or deadlines or busy peaks and troughs of your industry, for example. And then there's other times when your personal life will demand more of you than your professional life, and rather than a balance, I like to talk about it as a successful integration. And I think we've had this conversation.
Oh, I can't, yes.
I hate balance,
for the record, I can't stand.
It's this mythical, like elusive thing that nobody has ever achieved.
Yeah.
And so because of the changing nature of work and of life, this concept of integration is so much healthier than, to me, than work-life balance, because there is no equilibrium. It's always like this, it's always going like that. And so to have that integration and manage that, and enable people to manage that ebb and flow, that requires compromise. So on the weeks when you are needed to work a bit more or a bit harder or a bit faster or whatever to meet those deadlines, or to, you know, whatever it is that you need to do, you feel more inclined to do that if you are valued as an individual, being seen as your whole self, embracing that personal aspect of you as well as the professional, you know, the job that you do. You're far more inclined to deliver more and go further if you are able to have that compromise and that understanding that occasionally you need to prioritize your personal life over your professional life, and likewise the other way round when the need arises. And, you know, having the options to work flexibly in ways that suit your job and your life, just it feeds into that. So I think, you know, that it's about tapping into that discretionary effort piece for me. You know, we're always looking for ways in businesses, we're always looking for ways to tap into that discretionary effort, and flexible working does it effortlessly, because, you know, you show people that they are able to work in ways that suit their work and their life and deliver their best.
Yeah. So the other point which comes on to do that, you need a toolbox, you need some assets that you as individuals can call to, and so can a company. So can you share with the audience today, when you refer to your toolbox, what companies and individuals should have in their toolbox to enable flexible working?
Yeah, so there's one particular tool that I use that I really wanted to share today, which is a team charter framework that I've developed specifically for flexible working. And what I noticed was that a lot of companies use the team charter concept to, you know, develop their purpose for their team and to, you know, kind of unify everybody. But when it comes to flexible working, it's an extraordinarily, it's a catalyst for you know, accelerated adoption of flexible working. So more people can work flexibly through going through this process. It overcomes all of the challenges that we've talked about earlier today, and enables teams to have very, very open discussions about the things that hold them back, and crucially what that compromise looks like. So, you know, based on what we need to deliver as individuals within this team and as a collective, as a team, what's possible for us and how do we make that work. So if I can just,
this is the big reveal.
Go down here. There we go. So this is what a flexible working team charter can do, and I'll just run through these really, really quickly. But it helps teams to engage in really, really collaborative discussions about defining those possibilities and what, you know, based on what we need to deliver, as I've said, what flexible working can look like. In the process of having those conversations and asking those sometimes challenging questions among teams, you build that trust, because it is an example of those positive social interactions we talked about, going back to the scientific study about what stimulates trust. It also means that because you've got the opportunity to have those conversations and work through this process, that everyone feels really supported to make it work. And that addresses the challenge of managers not feeling like they've got the right tools, because it becomes far more collaborative rather than the onus being exclusively on the manager of a team.
Well, it's about bringing your whole self to work, isn't it, rather than your work self, and sort of having a, you know, cutting half of you behind and just leaving the fact that you've got children or parents or hospital appointments or triathlons to do, and just pretending it's just not reality.
No, and that's really archaic, and I think that I don't see so much of that in recent years. That is definitely falling away. But I think one of the things that people really struggle with is that concept of moving towards a focus on, based on outcomes over those hours worked. And we've got that really traditional mindset because contracts are based on hours, and we have that really fixed
whole professions, the legal sector,
absolutely, billable hours, of course,
hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the conventional structure of the working day, being from 9 to 5, obviously, lots of companies work outside of that, but the question I get asked a lot is, how do we as a business operate successfully and maintain outstanding service delivery levels if we're operating at different times to our clients or our customers? How does that work? And so it enables teams to have all of these intricate conversations about what that looks like for them, and as I said at the start, asking them, because they're the experts in what they do, they come up with incredible solutions. And that then leads to improved ongoing organic performance management conversations, because you're focusing on what we deliver as a business rather than how many hours have I worked in a day. You're not thinking about that as a productivity metric. You're thinking about what have I achieved and how have I done that against what's important to me personally. And that then means that it reduces the need for these formalized approaches to performance management, because it becomes part of the fabric of the way that you operate as a team. You're always talking about the deliverables and what's possible. It may not be possible for you to work flexibly every day, for example. It's not possible. I'm a huge and staunch advocate for flexible working, but I don't achieve it every single day because of the demands of my job. And it's not about working less. It's about working in different ways to achieve the same outcome.
It's about working productively, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
It's this sort of the corporate bullshit, if I can say that, of that you would bill for something. There's the lack of the transparency of how it actually needs to be getting done. It's the value on the output rather than how long it takes to do something. You could do something in 10 minutes. I remember a lawyer only a couple of years ago, I needed their advice, and I really needed their advice, but they billed me for over an hour's work when I know that it only took them 10 minutes.
But it's the value, isn't it, of that?
It's the value, but if they billed me for an hourly rate, when if they had changed the way they billed me, I would have still paid the same. But I know, and they knew, that it didn't take them an hour to do it.
It's the way it's positioned, isn't it? And that's the same challenge that people have where, my contract says 37 and a half hours or whatever. And a lot of times, because we've got this problem with the opposite problem, in fact, people think that when people work flexibly, they're going to work less. And in fact, they end up, there's a chronic problem of overworking and people not being able to switch off, because they have this autonomy to deliver in the way that they see as best. And so, quite a few people that I've worked with recently have said, well, I'll just, if we were looking at hours, I'd switch off on a Thursday morning because I would have done everything by then. So if we were just thinking about hours, it wouldn't make any sense. So you can almost abandon hours as a measure of productivity, because when you have these conversations and build these charters, you look at specifically what are the metrics that we will use to discover whether this method of working for us is successful, and how will we tackle those challenges when they come up, and what are the risks. So we'll talk about that.
So can we, with the time, we've got about 20 minutes left. Can you do the big reveal and sort of talk us through the steps of your team framework?
Of course.
So that people can go away and go, right, I can actually, they either can get in touch with you or they can start to implement this themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the framework here. And so the first step is about bringing everybody together in defining the very specific purpose of a team. And what you often find when you go through this part of the process is that people will talk about the strangest things as being part of their purpose. And
could you give an example of something?
So what I mean by that is, like, if you're working with so what have I been working with recently, like a commercial team, for example, I ask the question, you know, what is the purpose of your team? You know, what do you do for the business, and what would be missing if you weren't there? And they talk about that they being a commercial team, you know, they have financial targets, and that to me, you know, that's a performance metric, but it's not the purpose. So I think people sometimes need a little bit of coaxing to understand what you mean by that. And what we mean by this in the first step, the purpose of this step, is to bring everybody together in a common understanding of what you need to deliver as a team beyond the financial metrics and, you know, those kind of very clinical measures of success.
Could you give an example of what you mean by that? So there's
absolutely. So what's the difference you make as a team? So what is the impact of your work? How does your existence as a team make your colleagues' lives better, easier, your customers? What is the outcome of your work? Why do you go to work? What is the reason you do your job? And you know, building on that, what do you need to deliver specifically for the business? And then you can move on to the second step, which is in the context of what we specifically need to deliver for the business. And what comes up in those conversations is often that people are getting involved in delivering or getting involved in entangled in doing things because they feel compelled to do them if they're asked by other teams, for example, that aren't actually specifically related to their purpose and delivery.
So could, for my benefit, and it might be a good working example, sales, for instance, everybody goes, oh no, you can't do sales, you have to be on full time, you're all about responding to the clients, you have to, all these have to, should. So to me, sales is about building relationships. That's, if I was in your commercial sales team, I'd be saying, to me, it's all about, my purpose is to build relationships. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So if we use that as an example of a sales team that, yes, they've got commercial targets. Everybody in a sales team has got that commercial target, but they're really there to build and nurture relationships.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So if that was, so am I on the right page? So that would be step one. So then if we then took that example to step two, how would you then explain the framework using that example?
So based on what you need to deliver, so building those meaningful relationships, what is possible for you in relation to options for working flexibly? Is it that your job is location specific? No, unless you are attending in-person meetings with client colleagues, you know, that kind of thing. So can you be flexible about your hours and your location on an ad hoc basis? And I think it's also, that's a really important point, actually, it's just occurred to me, we haven't talked about this yet, is it's really important to differentiate between permanent contractual changes in relation to a flexible working arrangement that is either part-time or permanently home working, for example, would be a contractual agreement between the employer and the employee, right? So what this framework is for primarily is for accelerating the adoption of ad hoc flexibility, for people to work flexibly on an everyday basis. So they might have a project that comes up where they can work from home to get that really concentrated and focused time in a different location without the interruptions of the office, for example. So if you're going to embrace a flexible working culture, and you want to cultivate the behaviours and culture that mean that it's acceptable for anyone from any demographic to work flexibly, then it's about making that possible every day, not just once a year when somebody can apply for flexible working. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, going back to the possibilities, it's about identifying very specifically, is it possible for us to work in this way? Is it possible for us to work in that way? And if the answer is yes, then those are part of those possibilities. Okay.
And then once you define those possibilities, you then move to step 3, which is to identify the needs and what you need to do to make those possibilities work.
Absolutely right. So yeah, so what do we as a team need to make it work? And that could be you know, things like we need to build trust. We need to, you know, address the challenge of trust within our team. Even if we, you know, we're working pretty well together, we feel like that would be a beneficial thing for us to do to make flexible working work, so that we don't, you know, we don't make those assumptions about people that if they're not here, they're not working. Or equally internally, that if I'm working away from everyone else, that I'm assuming they're thinking I'm not working, you know. So you have to have those really open conversations. And this is one of my favorite steps, actually. I mean, I love them all, but this is the favorite one for me, I think, because it really does open up those opportunities for people to talk about the things that you know, they think, and then like the innermost workings of their brain, you know, and the bizarre things that people do. Like, you know, you hear crazy stories of, and I mean, they're crazy, but they're really common, of people literally running to the kettle and running back so that their internal social media button doesn't go amber and it looks like they're not working. You know, it's you know, you would never do that in an office. You don't see people running to the loo and then running back again because they think people are going to think they're not working. It just doesn't happen. And it does happen when people are working flexibly.
But then that comes identifying the needs, which I think is the big thing, which you've already talked about, is the communication. So the need to, so if you take the sales team analogy and you're all working with clients and responding to their needs, and you're, you know, you might be working at different times, it's how you come together as a team to communicate what you're all up to, so you stay united, but you also have the freedom to get on and do your job in the most productive way possible.
Yeah, absolutely right. So that comes up universally as one of the needs. You know, we need to communicate really effectively, but what doesn't come up is the how. And this is the bit that I find really useful as an external expert on flexible working, to facilitate that conversation and to be challenging in those conversations, because, you know, it's people know the what. We need this, we need this, we need this, and they come up with a list very, very easily. But then moving on to, well, how are we actually going to achieve that, is a bit more of an intricate conversation, and that's where we invest the time with people, and that's why, after building the team charter, and incidentally, I found that it works better running this virtually than it did in person. It's so interesting, just because you're able to, when you're in a room, and you, particularly in bigger groups, you split people off into groups, and then you're not able to be there for all of the conversations.
Yes, that's true.
And so you can't, you know, when they get stuck, or when they don't perhaps challenge themselves to go into enough depth on the needs front, and, you know, how are we actually going to make this work long term? What are the things we're going to put in place? Like, you know, are we going to commit to talking about this at our team meetings? Are we going to commit to promoting what we're doing on our internal social media channels? You know, whatever it might be. Are we going to commit to, you know, supporting and empowering each other to think about different ways that we could work flexibly? Or if we agree that, you know, we've looked at those possibilities, and we find that people aren't doing it but would like to, how will we support them? That kind of thing. I've lost my train of thought now.
No, that's fine. And we've only got a few minutes left. So people, please, our lovely audience today, please put any questions you have in the chat box and I will pick them up. But this is where it does get unraveled. It's all in the how, and trying to keep it's simple and straightforward. So if we just come on to step 4 and step 5, it's so you've identified the needs, so you're very clear. Then how do you ensure success? What's the sort of the check-ins to make sure that great intentions don't go out of the window, and before everybody's known it, they go, well, that was a great workshop on flexible working. We all got the principle. We all started. It's a bit like taking out gym membership, and then it all unravels 2 months later.
Very much so. Very much so.
How do you ensure success? How do you embed that new behavior? What have you seen that clients have done as they've worked their way through step 1 and 2 and 3 to embed the change? Because that's when the shift happens.
Yeah, it does. You're absolutely right, Julia. It's about keeping it front of mind and making sure that you talk about it regularly as a team. And in this step, you look at, what are the interdependencies with other teams? What will the impact be of us making this shift? And how are we going to raise the profile and position what we're doing as a team in a way which enables other teams to think about the benefits to them of us working in this way? And us as role models, going back to that leadership and role modeling piece. So, in this step, we talk about those risks and challenges that you might come up against, perceptions from others, that kind of thing. And how will you measure the success of what you're doing? That is, think about the metrics. So, is it possible for you to measure productivity easily? Is it possible for you to measure the happiness of the team and people's well-being and score that? There's so many tools that you can use now to analyze those metrics, and what everyone comes up with, they're always different. The outcomes of these conversations are always very different. So, but what does happen in very, very commonplace is in this step is that teams agree that they will include this to their agenda, for example. So they might talk about in their regular team catch-ups, they might talk about how they're all working flexibly and what they've found, how they felt about it, and that then keeps this conversation going. That's really useful.
Yeah, okay. And is there anything else that you would like to add? I suppose, what are the top 3 benefits you found from creating a team talent charter? Sorry, a team charter framework.
So the top 3, I think it improves trust. I think people feel more empowered to work flexibly than they had done before, even if it was something that was positioned by the business as something they really support. It ties everything together, so it supports managers, it addresses the most common challenges of poor trust levels and that risk taking and that kind of lack of confidence for people to either manage the different ways of working, because they agree it amongst themselves how often they're going to speak and how they're going to manage it. So I think it's people feel empowered and more engaged and motivated, and they do more, and it goes back to that discretionary effort piece. The benefits are endless of this.
They are endless, and without sending us down another conversation for another hour, I think the one thing that, and we've seen a lot of this, that people have had to, the old way of working is that you kept your home life very separate from your work life.
Yeah.
The new way of working is that you are given permission to integrate the two. Some people are naturally more open and relaxed about sharing their home life and their home setup than others. You've then got different religious beliefs and the way people want to manage their time, and your home is your home is where the heart is. It's where it's your vulnerable spot. We'll all protect our families at any cost. So how do you give permission for people not to abuse other people's vulnerabilities of sharing what's going on in their home life in a way to encourage work-life integration? That's a big one, but
that's a big question. Like you say, we could run a
question, and I know I'm ending on a very big question, but
for me it comes up in these conversations within the team charter. So what comes up a lot, and something that I challenge the businesses that I work with to ask themselves is, do people need a reason to work flexibly? And if people want to share a reason, then that's entirely their prerogative. But should they have to? Because if it's available to everybody, as an option, because we've agreed that this is the future of work, and this is the way we want to move forward as a business, to unleash the power of our people and to really make sure that we get the best from everybody and help them sustain great well-being, also leverage the technology that we have to be able to work in different ways so we can perform better as a business. And why do people need a reason? And then that empowers people. When you have that conversation and you become reason agnostic in a way, that people don't feel that pressure to share if they don't want to. And I think when you empower people to have that choice, about how much they share, because inevitably there will be some people who are intensely private, and we all have different personality types, and I think that part of building an inclusive culture is about a deep respect for everybody as individuals, isn't it? And so moving towards becoming reason agnostic for flexible working is a really great way to allow people to have the freedom to share if they want to, and be private if that's their preference. And
I think on that note, that is a segue for another webinar on being reason agnostic for flexible working, because I think one of the concerns of flexible working is of showing your vulnerability, and that comes full circle back to creating a trusting environment. So on that note, you have talked beautifully to our group for the last hour, so thank you very, very much indeed. Does anybody have a question? Everybody wants your slides.
Oh, great. That's great.
So we will,
it's been useful.
Charlotte, my colleague, will send out the slides within the next, hopefully today, but definitely by tomorrow. And I would just like to take this opportunity to thank our audience for coming on today. I hope the sun does come out and shine at some point. I hope that you've gone away feeling inspired with what you need to do to increase the flexible working culture of your company. And that just leaves me to give Ursula a massive, massive hug and thank you for sharing your insights and your observations so openly and freely with us today.
Well, you're very welcome, and that's the way I like to work. I always I've got a ton of research and,
brilliant. And if people want to get in touch with you directly, so if people want to get in touch with you directly, I presume your contact details will be on the slides, will they?
Yeah, they are. But I can, just connect with me on LinkedIn. And let's have a chat. If you want to run anything past me or any challenges that you're facing, I'm happy to jump on a quick call and give you.
Brilliant. Well, everybody seems to be very aligned and inspired by the chat today. So stay safe, everybody. Work flexibly and integrate your lives. All right. Take care.
Thank you.